Good evening. This side, Rahul Magan here. Today, I am going to be discussing a concept which is very broad in nature. And I do not want we should restrict this concept to a relevant country, say XYZ, to a relevant fund, say XYZ, or a relevant company, say XYZ. Because this concept is so broad and wide, and more importantly, it is changing. Ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you in a minute that I started my career in a treasury function in 2007. And trust, today is 2024. Even after 17 years, I am finding that the things are not only changed, but also in the global financial centers like Dubai, Singapore, US, European Union, Luxembourg, and respective. They are working extremely hard and coming up with a highly innovative products, and they deserve kudos for that. Let it be very honest. But that is unfortunate part that we are busy in few things where we should not be busy. Ladies and gentlemen, we all know that apparently speaking, that the fund management activity across the globe is divided into two parts. One is called collective investment schemes, and other is called the private funds. Now, collective investment schemes in a local parlance, in a very simplistic language, is known as mutual funds. On the contrary, the private funds are of variety of kinds. Example, venture capitalist, private equity, angel funds, trust funds, and the list is long. Even, ladies and gentlemen, you would be surprised to know that private equity in itself is a topic to study. I witnessed that in the last decade, the changes which has had happened in the private equity world is humongous in nature, like the limited partners, the general partners, and so on and so forth. And of course, if God is very kind, that we would have the detailed videos very soon. But let me tell you, the model of private equity has changed in the last decade, and God willing, the next 10 years to come, this model would again change. So this is not the same as we had in 2007. Lot of innovativeness, lot of new things, lot of positivity came into the picture. But that is up to us whether we wanted to see positivity or some other thing. But I see positivity. Ladies and gentlemen, when we speak about private funds, there is a separate category of the private fund, which is also known as private pooled structures, shortly known as PPS, private pooled structures. Technically, some countries refer them as alternate investment funds, shortly known as AIF. It is my respectful submission that I strongly believe that alternate investment funds are one part of private pooled structures. So technically, what I'm saying is that, our Earth is definitely a part of our solar system, and our solar system is a part of our, the universe, the galaxy. We are having multiverse. Even the top scientists, top science bodies started acknowledging that we are living in a multiverse. Multiverse means there is a high probability that the structure like our Earth may be available in various universe. God knows, only the God knows. Similarly, private pool structure is like a universe. And in a universe, we are having one planet known as Earth. There is a high probability that we may have multiple planets like Earth. So when we are referring to books, without specifically linking to any country or any special securities laws of XYZ country, we started getting a feeling that private pool structures means alternate investment funds. No, I completely disregard this with a very respectful submission, because the private pool structure is a very, very big and very broad concept. Very broad concept. Ladies and gentlemen, financial market in itself is a very broad concept. Very broad concept and getting broad and broader. But alternate investment fund, one part is clear, that few investors who are private in nature, they join hands for a common purpose. Now that common purpose may be to earn a regular income, which is shortly known as dividends in a very plain language. That common purpose might be to invest in sophisticated products like commodities, derivatives, credit linked products, and so on and so forth. That common purpose might be to take a passive stake in any company. Now, we all understand that the stakes are of two kinds. One is the active stake, whereby a relevant person XYZ enter by whatever percentage of the company, and then he declare to the stock exchange, as per the rules of that country, that he bought so and so stake in so and so company. And thereafter he started interfering in that company on the board and so on and so forth. Of course, some countries, some regulations title this as nominated investors also. But I strongly feel that there is a wide difference between nominated investors and active stake. But anyways, this is not the topic for today. Now, ladies and gentlemen, technically speaking, different countries of the globe have divided alternate investment fund into a variety of categories. Now, that is up to the country and the legal system, the security law. We are no one to comment on that. But having said that, one important document which alternate investment fund have to have in picture, and that too before incorporation, that is known as Private Placement Memorandum, shortly known as PPM. But here also, I wish to place my respectful submission, is that there are many people who believe that Private Placement Memorandum is a static document, which means that, now, first of all, there is a unanimous thinking that private placement memorandum is pre-incorporation document, which means that before you incorporating an alternate investment fund, you are putting this document into picture. In many cases, the countries, say XYZ, are having an interplay of private placement memorandum with the merchant banker also. But I fail to understand that even today, many people do not understand the difference between investment banker and merchant banker. This basic difference between an investment banker and merchant banker is not known to many people, because when I speak with them on WhatsApp, on Skype, and so on and so forth, I am finding that this so and so gentlemen do not even understand that basic difference. Henceforth, ladies and gentlemen, when as an alternate investment fund, there are 5 people, A, B, C, D, E, and they are residing in some jurisdiction, say X. Now, when A, B, C, D, E decided to form an alternate investment fund, and assuming that alternate investment fund is formed in a jurisdiction which is different from a jurisdiction in which they incorporated. So let's assume they incorporated, they 5 reside in, say, Mauritius, example. And they wanted to have alternate investment fund in Singapore, which means that they are supposed to follow the guidelines of Singapore, though they reside in Mauritius. But there is a catch. In an alternate investment fund structure, there are two things which is called appropriated regulated funds, which is shortly known as ARF. Let me again repeat: appropriated regulated funds. And there is another thing which is called appropriated regulated entities. Now, the most simplistic, let me tell you, the most simplistic definition of an appropriate regulated fund is a fund which is incorporated in some another entity, say Mauritius, and this fund is creating a fund in separate entity called Singapore. But it is up to the Singapore government to decide whether they accept the guidelines of Mauritius on a prima facie basis. Now, what is the prima facie basis? That's a legal and very technical term. We need to agree. Now, the prima facie basis means that, when a fund is incorporated in Mauritius, now this is a hypothetical example, right? And Singapore, for an example, assume that the fund which is incorporated is Mauritius is prima facie managed in a way, the way Singapore government want to manage a fund, which means Singapore government is in agreement that if a fund, say X, is incorporated in Mauritius, we'll let this fund to operate the way other funds are operating in Singapore who are principally incorporated in Singapore. Which means, suppose there is a fund called P who is principally incorporated in Singapore, and this fund is at par with the fund X who is principally incorporated in Mauritius. Appropriate regulated entity is altogether a different and a broad concept and getting broader. Which means that an entity, suppose that X, is not a fund. It is an entity. It is a company. It is a body corporate, or it may be a private equity, or it may be a venture capitalist. Now, first of all, there is a thing called company law. In company law, corporation and body corporate both differs from country to country. Different countries have their different, like in India, we are having Companies Act 2013. And let me tell you, Companies Act 2013 is, I would say, designed in a very perfect manner. And it is a very broad concept. Almost every possible day, Honorable Supreme Court is coming up with one or another judgment covering X and Y facts which are laid before the court. So it is getting wider. And now with Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code, the Securitization Act, and variety of acts in picture, there is a perfect interplay. Similarly, if let's assume the X is an entity which is incorporated in Mauritius, and that entity wanted to float a fund in Singapore, which means that it is up to a Singapore government to decide whether this entity is allowed to operate as a fund in Singapore or not. Henceforth, in an alternate investment fund, the appropriate regulated entity as well as appropriate regulated fund, both are completely different structures. And this should not be generalized. Because if we are generalizing that way we are diluting the impact of that, which should not be the case, in my respectful submission. Now coming to the basic point, which is called the private placement memorandum. I strongly feel that private placement memorandum should not be titled as a pre-incorporation document. Of course, when I'm forming an AIF in a company, say XY, in a country, say XYZ, then I need to have a private placement memorandum into the picture. And the very important and the broad concept is that private placement memorandum should be as per the corporate law of that country. So example, if I'm forming an alternate investment fund in Singapore, then the private placement memorandum should be as per the Companies Act of Singapore, like how Companies Act of Singapore is designing or allowing the private placement, like just like section 41 read with 42 of the Companies Act 2013 in India, talking about the private placement. But this is not the only definition of the private placement. The definition of the private placement is very wide, very wide. Henceforth, ladies and gentlemen, I strongly feel that once we are incorporating an alternate investment fund, it is our respectful duty, a legal duty, to make sure that the document which we are putting on the table, which is known as private placement memorandum, this document should not be static, rather it would be an evolving document. And ladies and gentlemen, by evolving document, I mean just like article of association and memorandum of association. You know, there are few countries whereby amending memorandum and article of association is very rigid. However, there are few countries whereby amending article and memorandum of association is not that rigid the way we think. The way we think. My respectful submission is, I repeat, my respectful submission is, we should not only understand, but we should also make sure that the company's law of so and so country should be designed in a way that the private placement memorandum should be allowed to amend, even at the later stages. But, when I'm referring to a word even at the later stages, then I'm referring to from a point of view which is bona fide in nature, which means that the amendment or the alteration which is happening should be bona fide, not the mala-fide in nature. That's very important concept which we need to understand. Of course, more videos on the card, but I strongly believe that the private placement memorandum, one of the critical documents which an alternate investment fund is supposed to file, that document is very, very critical in nature. And ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you that this document designing should be in a good hands. The alternate investment fund should wisely understand the difference between merchant banker and investment banker. The alternate investment fund should not only understand the difference, but also fix the responsibility of XYZ so and so investment banker in so and so country when we are filing the private placement memorandum as per so and so company's law of that country. This is a very broad concept and getting broader. Let me tell you, almost every possible day, I'm finding that it is technically known as alternate space, shortly people call, and some people call this as a alts. Of course, I respect both definitions. The alts, the industry of alts is amending. And it is not only amending. This industry is getting a wider respect. This is what I wish to convey in this video. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Rahul Magan, and it is a pleasure to speak with you. Of course, more videos on the card, but I wish to close with a submission that the world of financial market is not restricted to what we see, and what we are pushed to see. It is like an ocean, which is getting wider and wider. And to swim an ocean for a normal human being, it is like a dream. But this ocean is getting wider and wider, and God willing, maybe 10 years down the line, or probably many years down the line, this ocean would be too wider to swim for a normal person. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. It is really a pleasure. This is Rahul Magan. Thank you.